Mission sparks movement. On January 8, 1956, around 3 in the afternoon, 5 American missionaries were killed on a sandbar along the Curare River in Ecuador. Jim Elliot, 28, Nate Saint, 32, Ed McCully, 28, Peter Fleming, 27, and Roger Udarian, 29, had established a contact camp at Palm Beach to reach the Waorani tribe. The isolated group numbered between 300 and 600 people, divided into 3 hostile factions. After a friendly first contact on January 6th, involving gift exchanges, warriors arrived 2 days later. 3 women crossed the river, dividing the missionaries' attention before the attack. Jim Elliot was speared first, and fired pistol shots into the air as a warning rather than defense. Peter Fleming waded into the water to greet the women, and was immediately speared. On the beach, senior warrior Gakita led the assault against Nate Saint, then Ed McCully, then Roger Udarian. The warriors threw all 5 bodies and their belongings into the Curare River. Marge Saint and Olive Fleming waited for the scheduled 4:30 radio call that never came. Search parties recovered all 5 bodies between January 11th and 13th. Nate Saint's watch had stopped at 3:12, marking the moment of death. The men were buried together at Palm Beach on January 14th. Life magazine's coverage galvanized the evangelical missionary movement worldwide, and the widows later returned to work with the Waorani people, leading to spiritual transformation and peace between hostile tribal groups. Modern missionary death. On November 15th, 2018, John Allen Chow made his first attempt to reach North Sentinel Island in the Andaman Islands. The 26-year-old American evangelical missionary hired local fishermen for 25,000 rupees and kayaked toward the protected island, approximately 1,600 kilometers from mainland India. Sentinelese archers shot arrows at him immediately. One arrow pierced his waterproof Bible, stopping inches from his body. Chow retreated to the fishing boat. The next day, November 16th, Chow returned to the island. The Sentinelese laughed and did not attack during this second visit. Chow spent the evening preparing to return, telling the fishermen he did not want to die. On November 17th, Chow explicitly instructed the fishermen to leave him on the island and return to the mainland. He swam to shore carrying his Bible, sleeping bag, and gifts including machetes and fishhooks. Sentinelese archers shot multiple arrows at Chow as he attempted to shield himself. Tribe members dragged his body along the beach and buried it in the sand. The fishermen witnessed the entire sequence from offshore and reported to Indian authorities. 7 people were arrested for assisting the illegal expedition. Indian authorities confirmed the death, but abandoned efforts to retrieve his body when Sentinelese archers shot at Coast Guard officers, and his family released a statement forgiving the Sentinelese people. Rockefeller vanishes. On November 18, 1961, a catamaran carrying Michael Clark Rockefeller capsized in violent ocean waters near the mouth of the Betts River in southwestern Dutch New Guinea. The 23-year-old son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller had been collecting Asmat art with Dutch anthropologist René Vossing and 2 Asmat teenagers. The teenagers jumped and swam to shore, reaching the settlement of Agats by evening to alert authorities. Michael and Vossing clung to the overturned hull throughout the night. On the morning of November 19th, around 7 or 8, Michael created a flotation device with 2 jerry cans tied to his belt. He told Vossing he thought he could make it, and began swimming toward shore, estimated between 3 and 10 miles away. Vossing watched Michael swim in a straight line toward the coast. After 30 minutes, Michael disappeared. Vossing later recalled seeing 3 dots, the 2 cans and Michael's head, before they vanished. Search operations found no body. The official cause was listed as drowning. Dutch priests documented detailed confessions from Oostgeneep villagers describing Michael's killing and consumption as revenge for a 1958 colonial massacre that killed 5 Oostgeneep warriors. The government suppressed the reports, citing concerns about colonial position. Journalist Carl Hoffman's 2014 investigation uncovered the suppressed evidence decades later, revealing deliberate cover-up by government officials and the Rockefeller family. Bishop chooses martyrdom. On the evening of July 20th, 1987, Sister Inés Arango Velázquez wrote a farewell letter expressing her willingness to die for her mission in the Ecuadorian Amazon. The 50-year-old Colombian nun and 67-year-old Spanish bishop Alejandro Labaca Ugarte were aware of escalating danger as oil companies expanded into Tagaeri territory near Concession Zone 16. Both were fluent in indigenous languages and intended to initiate dialogue to prevent violence against the isolated Tagaeri people. On the morning of July 21st, a helicopter dropped Bishop Labaka and Sister Inez at a designated meeting point in Tagaeri territory. Both carried gifts and were fully conscious of the risks. They were motivated by their desire to defend Tagaeri rights against oil company mercenaries and economic exploitation. On July 22nd, the helicopter returned to retrieve the missionaries. Authorities discovered both bodies pierced with multiple spears and arrows at the meeting point. The deaths sparked international attention to indigenous rights and oil company conflicts in Ecuador. Both had knowingly chosen to enter the territory of a hostile tribe to protect the most vulnerable people from environmental destruction. Pope Leo XIV declared both Alejandro Labaca and Inés Arango venerable on May 22, 2025, recognizing their martyrdom, and their deaths continue to inspire indigenous rights movements throughout the Amazon. Fishermen drift ashore. On the evening of January 25, 2006, 2 Indian fishermen set out illegally to poach crabs and lobsters in the protected waters surrounding North Sentinel Island. Sundar Raj, 48, and Pandit Tiwari, 52, knew the risks of illegal poaching, but attempted the venture anyway for profit. After a day of harvesting, they moored their boat and planned to sleep through the night before returning to the mainland. During the night between January 25th and 26th, their boat broke loose from its moorings. Currents or wind pushed the vessel directly toward North Sentinel Island. At dawn on January 26th, the fishermen awoke to find their boat had drifted onto the shore of the island. They realized immediately they were now on the territory of the Sentinelese, the same isolated tribe known for violently rejecting any outsiders who landed on their shores. The Sentinelese responded to the invasion of their territory by killing both fishermen. The tribe had consistently shot arrows at anyone attempting to land, regardless of intent or circumstance. Indian authorities later observed the bodies on the beach from a distance. The Sentinelese prevented any retrieval attempts. The incident predated John Chow's death by 12 years and demonstrated the Sentinelese tribe's consistent pattern of violent rejection of outsiders, showing that the tribe does not discriminate between poachers and missionaries. By the way, if you find this informative, I cover stories like these regularly. Consider subscribing if you'd like to see more. Now back to the video. First, martyrs. In August 1943, New Tribes Mission sent its very first missionary team into the Bolivian jungle to contact the Ayoreo people along the Tucavaca River region. 5 men, brothers Cecil and Bob Dye, Dave Bacon, George Hosbach, and Eldon Hunter, all in their late 20s to early 30s, represented the organization's inaugural effort. The young, idealistic team traveled upriver by canoe to an Ayoreo camp. The team arrived at the settlement when the adult men of the tribe were away hunting. Caratabide, an Ayoreo elder, heard of the missionaries' arrival and recognized them as a potential threat. He warned the tribe to flee the area, and Ayoreo families began gathering to leave. The 5 missionaries, unaware the tribe was leaving, continued waiting at the camp for peaceful contact. As Ayoreo men returned and approached, the missionaries attempted a peace gesture by waving their hats and objects in the air. The Ayoreo warriors did not interpret the hat waving as a peaceful gesture and perceived the missionaries as a threat. Warriors surrounded the camp and attacked with arrows and lances, killing all 5 missionaries. The warriors buried the bodies on the riverbank, following Ayoreo burial practices. Decades later, the Ayoreo who killed the missionaries experienced Christian conversion, and Paul Dye, Cecil's son, remarkably returned as a missionary to the Ayoreo people, choosing reconciliation over revenge. Journalist and defender. On June 1st through 4th, 2022, Dom Phillips asked Bruno Pereira to accompany him to document illegal fishing operations in Brazil's Vale do Javari indigenous territory. Phillips, a 57-year-old British journalist, had lived in Brazil since 2007 and was writing a book titled How to Save the Amazon. Pereira, a 41-year-old Brazilian indigenist and father of 3, led surveillance teams documenting environmental violations after being dismissed from his government position in October 2019 under political pressure. On June 4th, Phillips and Pereira encountered Amarildo Costa de Oliveira, known as Pelado, operating an illegal fishing boat in indigenous land. That evening, Pelado visited the house where Phillips and Pereira were staying and overheard Pereira ask Phillips to take his photo. Pelado interpreted the photo documentation as a threat to his illegal operation and contacted Jefferson da Silva Lima for backup. On the early morning of June 5th, Phillips and Pereira left around 7 to head toward Atalaya do Norte. Pelado and da Silva pursued their boat and opened fire multiple times, killing both men. The bodies were thrown in the water and later cremated. The fishermen witnessed the entire sequence from offshore. Police recovered cremated remains on June 22nd, after Amarildo confessed on June 15th. An investigation revealed a large, organized crime structure financing illegal fishing and drug trafficking operations. Forest guardian killed. On November 1st, 2019, Paulo Paulino Guajajara went hunting in the forest near Arariboia Indigenous Territory in Maranhão State, Brazil. The 26-year-old was a member of the Guardians of the Forest surveillance team protecting the isolated Awa people, one of Brazil's most vulnerable groups with fewer than 500 individuals. The territory had become increasingly targeted by illegal loggers seeking valuable hardwoods. Paulo and companion Laercio Guajajara were both armed for self-defense in the region that had become increasingly dangerous. While hunting, they were ambushed by illegal loggers. Paulo had stopped to drink from a waterhole when the loggers attacked. The ambush suggested premeditation, as the loggers knew Paulo was in the area and targeted him specifically. Paulo was shot and killed by gunfire. Laercio was injured in the attack but managed to escape and called for emergency response. Between 1991 and 2023, 38 Guajajara indigenous guardians were killed in Arariboia, with no perpetrators successfully convicted until Paulo's case became a federal case in 2024. The trial was repeatedly delayed. As of November 2025, 6 years after his death, no verdict had been reached, highlighting systemic impunity and ongoing danger for forest guardians protecting isolated peoples from illegal logging operations. Loggers killed. In August 2022, an initial conflict occurred between loggers and the Mashco-Pito people in the Tahuamanu River basin of Peru's Madre de Dios region near the Brazil border. One logger was killed by bow and arrow, and another was injured. The Mashco-Pito, an uncontacted indigenous group also called Nomole, had never sought contact with outsiders. Despite this incident, logging companies continued expanding timber operations deeper into Mashco-Pito territory between 2022 and 2023. Deforestation accelerated as commercial timber companies ignored warnings and indigenous territorial boundaries. In August 2024, violence escalated dramatically. 2 loggers were killed by Mashco-Pito archers using traditional bows and arrows. 2 additional loggers were reported missing, with evidence suggesting more attacks on logging parties. FENAMAD, the Federation of Amazonian Indigenous Peoples, had warned the Peruvian government about escalating violence in July 2024. The organization documented that Mashco-Pito were increasingly visible and aggressive near logging sites. The logging company MCT, operating in Concession 25, suspended operations following the August 2024 incident. The Forest Stewardship Council suspended certification of MCT's operations pending investigation. The FSC determined the company was operating in protected Mashco-Pito indigenous territory and suspended certification of the logging company's supposedly sustainable operations. Speared in river. On January 25, 2016, Chaiga Baihua, a Warani person, paddled a canoe along the Shiripuno River in the intangible zone of Ecuador's Yasuni National Park. The intangible zone was designated protected territory, specifically for the Tagaeri and Taromanani peoples, 2 isolated groups that had chosen to remain in voluntary isolation. Chaiga was working as a guide transporting tourists and was accompanied by Onenka, also known as Luciana Tuenyeme Nyamateja. The canoe was heading to Nyoneno community, with plans to return to Bameno in the intangible zone. Without warning, warriors from the isolated Tagaeri Taromanani groups attacked. The isolated peoples did not differentiate between different outsider groups and perceived all as threats to their territory in isolation. Warriors shot spears at the canoe. 4 spears struck Chaiga, who fell into the river, mortally wounded. The isolated warriors moved to finish off Onenka, but an elder intervened and told the warriors to let Onenka go. Onenka, gravely injured, floated downstream in the canoe and eventually fainted. Rescuers found Onenka downstream at Buanamo. The killing of Chaiga Baihua triggered a massive revenge response, where Warani warriors organized a raid using firearms and spears, killing 30 to 50 Taromanani, including women and children, with 2 young girls abducted, illustrating the cycle of retaliatory violence in territories surrounded by oil concessions. If this was informative, Consider subscribing so you don't miss future content. Thanks for watching.